Hello. So it has been a case that recently, in the last a few years here in Europe, I have been listening to this one thing about when I speak with people here, that they say, my English accent is not that Indian they expected it to be because I'm Indian. So apparently, most of the times they understand me, and I'm like, okay, but this is my natural accent. And when I post some video of me speaking something, and some of my friends on social media comment, oh, you have changed your accent, what a fake accent. But I want to address this thing. Actually, this is actually my natural accent, and this has always been my accent forever. And it's not something that I acquired, but it was always with me. Many people ask me in that sense that how do you have such a refined accent in English? Why don't you speak in the typical English accent way? And I personally don't have a real answer for this. I would attribute this feature towards my school and upbringing, towards my English teachers in my school. For instance, I can say that none of my English teachers in my school were not having Indian accent at all. Like, for example, Shubroto sir, Debojyoti sir, Bhaskar sir, even Shorbani ma'am, and Momita ma'am, and all the English teachers I can remember. Shopna ma'am, for instance, the first English teacher when we were like teenagers. None of them had an English accent actually. Sorry, none of them had an Indian accent actually. They speak English in a very refined way, and even one of our Bangla teachers were Runu ma'am, and when Runu ma'am used to speak in English, she had a very refined, almost British accent. And I think these teachers already having a refined accent on students like me who were like teenagers at that time had a good effect, and I kind of picked it up from there, apart from picking it up from American movies in a general sense, because personally learning English has one of my biggest ambitions from childhood, like learning English in a very refined and good manner. Like, I was in a school where speaking English was not mandatory. So, of course, we friends amongst each other spoke in Bengali because that's our regional language. But so the thing is, you end up at a place where you are not forced to speak a language, and if you're not forced to speak a language, you never really learn the language very well. So somewhere and at some point you have to force yourself, and from childhood I used to force myself to learn English in a much refined manner through movies and books. I started reading books much later in life. I would say late teenage years. I had this thing about reading books, and suddenly I fell in love with books, buying books. I was obsessed with books. I started reading in those times, which has been diminished in the last few years because of being busy with a lot of things. But learning English was something that I started in a very early age while watching TV mostly. I attribute most of my English learning, besides my teachers in school, to the TV that I had in my home. And I learned most of the English from Star Movies or HBO and other movie channels with all the American movie content that was coming up our way. And I had a very active mind to take in the way they speak English there, and I kind of took up the accent. That being said, I must say one thing: English accent is not a necessary important attribute when you're speaking the language in your own culture group. So if you speak in a very typical Indian accent, that's totally fine because everyone will get you. But accent becomes kind of important when you're coming out of your culture group to a multicultural, international, cosmopolitan group where you see different kinds of people speaking in different kinds of accent. There, all of the people have to be able to speak in a commonly understood way, and it has been my observation that many people do have troubles understanding Indian accent of English. The same way I do have troubles of understanding Asian accent of English, or for example, very thick Chinese accent. I had a supervisor from China in my seminar course last time, and he had a very thick Chinese accent, and I really had a hard time to understand him. In the same way, many Western people really do have hard time to understand many Indians speaking in very thick Indian accent. So I think it's important to get rid of the accent at some point when you are in a multicultural setting. But when you are inside your own culture silo and your own culture group where people are used to that accent, it's not a big deal. So that being said, it's nothing to be very proud of, nothing to be very ashamed of. None of that is true. Language learning is something very important for people to just express themselves at some point, unless you're studying literature and you have to really know the grammar to the point. But the main thing is about English learning is that the confidence that you must have. I have seen many people in India and coming from India sometimes struggle with their English because they lack some level of confidence, but they even more struggle when they can't express themselves properly, like when they speak and they have a very thick accent for which the others don't understand them, and at a certain point the others lose interest to listen to them, and the glue of conversation is lost in translation, like translating from accent to accent. For example, recently we remember interview of Donald Trump in America with a journalist, and that Indian journalist was speaking with a very thick Indian accent coming from a area with very thick accents probably, and he couldn't understand, and he had to use a translator for translating one accent of English to another accent of English, although the translator doing so was also Indian, so he was only translating the same Indian accent English to another Indian accent English, which was more palatable to him. So it was kind of a funny video, but this kind of shows how sometimes accents become a problem in places. For example, as I said, very thick Chinese accent is a trouble for me to understand English, and for many people like Italians. I have been in Italy for over a year, and Italians also have a very thick Italian accent where they emphasize all the syllables the very same way we Indians do. We emphasize the syllables, and it becomes sometimes funny for other people also. But at the same time, as I said, only in multicultural international situations, refining your accent is a good thing, apart from having the ability to speak proper English with confidence, because then it becomes easier for people to understand you. And if people understand you, the glue of conversation remains. And if it remains, you can express your feelings very well to people. So it's important in both senses. But refining the accent is probably the next level that you should try to unlock before unlocking after unlocking sorry after unlocking the level of confidence to speak English in a very fluent manner. And in my opinion, again, I did not refined my accent after I left India. Not really. I had the refined accent in me while I was growing up, because of the content in TV I used to watch were not Indian. So I have an accent somewhere. It is very less thick Indian accent, and somewhere between a bit of an American, a bit of a British mix. So I have a very mixed kind of an accent, which is still Indian but not very thick, and it becomes understandable to all the people, and that's a good compliment I keep hearing from people, apart from other compliments, and that's a thing to work on. Apart from that, I must say that let the accent not hinder your confidence and learning English while you are in a place where nobody really continues to speak in English and it becomes harder. I would say the easiest way to learn any language is completely restraining yourself and forcing yourself to be in that language, to think about it, to learn it forcefully, even though it is not. So it is something that comes from within, and watching a lot of movies, a lot of content really helped. And back in my time, I used to watch a lot of movies because, okay, I did not have a phone, I did not have an internet. Today it's much more easier. It's we have a phone on our hands, social media, and I mean so many contents on YouTube. People are speaking all the time. but I would still be a bit old school, and I would suggest to watch a lot of movies, read a lot of books to know a lot of words, apart from forcing yourself to speak. I mean, there are more old school activities to speak in front of the mirror, but I think it's less active nowadays, and forcing yourself to speak amongst some friends who are also intending to learn it in a good way could be a good way to learn the language. But again, learning English is not the real achievement of life, because once you have learned it, you have to get past of it, and you have to start learning other languages. If you're featuring your life in different parts of India, it's better to learn different Indian languages and not just Hindi, because Hindi is not the only language of India. There are other languages you must master. For example, I find Marathi to be a beautiful language. Although I almost understand it, I would be really happy if I would be able to speak it. And apart from India, if you're futuring, I mean, thinking about yourself a future in different parts of the country, I think the most widely spoken language apart from English on the Western world is Spanish. In the Eastern world is Mandarin Chinese, and German in a good amount of parts of Europe. But if you start going through European languages, this list never ends. The list of Latin languages are far bigger. And the future in Russia would entail you to learn Russian, but that's up to you. That's all about languages, accents, and the last thing I would say is keeping the brain open to languages is a good thing. Not being chauvinistic about a language is an important thing, because I see many people having this chauvinism and pride of the language, and they say, "No, learn me, not learn my language. I won't speak your language if you don't learn mine." That's a bad thing to do. I mean, if everyone would do that, then I would not be able to travel around in the world. People do speak English, even though English is not their language. In France, for example, in Paris, people spoke in English when I was having troubles and I wanted some directions. Parisians spoke in English with me, although English is not their language, they're not good at it. So, that being said, yes, English is not the only language you must learn, because many Europeans are not really good at English. Many Southern Europeans don't even know English, and then you need to have some other languages. If you are in Asia, Japanese people don't really speak English that much. If you go to Japan, you need to know some Japanese language. And that being said, again, if you are going in parts of India, I see this chauvinism of language, which is wrong. I think we do have a common thread amongst us, which is English, and we should encourage each others to learn and speak in English. And why English and why not Hindi? Because okay, if I start speaking in Hindi, then another language group say, "Oh, my language is equally beautiful. I can speak that language." Then, and that creates this Pandora's box. It opens the Pandora's box of language chauvinism. So let's get past of that and be open to learn languages. Be open to refine our accents and whatever it is. Be open to make people understand ourselves. That's more important.